In 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And welcome everyone to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast. Our live and welcome everyone to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast. I'm your host. Joining us today is Fabian Koss. Fabian, say hello.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for those in different parts of the world, or good evening as well.
Exactly. It's a global podcast, so people are tuning in from all around the world today here on Crowdcast and on LinkedIn Live. Before we begin the episode, folks, just want to make sure you all know how to subscribe. That's right. If you want to hear this episode on Wednesday when it's released, edited and released and produced by yours truly, make sure you subscribe to the Real Leaders Podcast. You can find us on Spotify. You can find us on Apple Podcasts. And there should be a link flying in here shortly that will let you know where to go. Also, folks, if you're interested in joining this Real Leaders community, if you want to see our beautiful digital magazine and receive that 4 times a year, it's packed full with leadership insights, inspiring stories, and how to be more inclusive and have an impact in the world. Just go online. We're having a cyber sale right now. It's $1 a year, Fabian. $1 a year. That's all you need to do. Go online, folks. $1 a year, and I promise you, your leadership skills will improve tremendously. Lastly, folks, what keeps this show going is your reviews. If you go on the Apple Podcasts, type in the Real Leaders Podcast, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and leave us a review. Last week, we were ranked in the top 50 for business, U.S. and business news here in the United States. So let's keep that momentum going. We love our followers, and we're continually looking for feedback. So leave a review. With that being said, folks, let's get this show on the road. Here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And welcome everyone to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Edwards. Joining us today is the founder of the KC Social Impact Lab. It's Fabian Koss. Fabian, thanks for being with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And it's a real honor to be here with the real leaders. And I love your tagline, and that's what I live for, is inspiring the future, which is really important. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm glad we have you on, and we want more people to be on like you, Fabian. And now it's interesting how we got on. That's actually a great segue, is because we interviewed Matthias Ublendizer, who wrote the book Expanding Circles here. And in that book is Mr. Fabian Koss talking about your journey back to Argentina for the your work with the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, and all that. So the first question for you today, Fabian, is what brought you back to Argentina, or Latin America, considering you were born in Argentina?
Well, that's a great question, because I was born in Argentina. I came to the United States as a child with my family, and just to give you an idea, I'm in my early 50s, and I was 1.5 years old when we immigrated to the United States. And thank goodness to my parents and my upbringing. Spanish was always the law of the land at home and at the dinner table. Even I joined the IDB in 1994 as a gringo, as a U.S. citizen. Argentina never left me, and thanks to being raised bicultural and binational, it was an opportunity to be able to join the Inter-American Development Bank. And Latin America always had a special place in my heart, especially Argentina and neighboring Uruguay. But joining the IDB in 1984, traveling extensively throughout the Western Hemisphere and the Americas was a dream come true, and it's something that never leaves you. You might leave Latin America, but Latin America never leaves you.
That's an interesting thought there. Like, what does that do to you when you get to experience so many different cultures all throughout the world? Did that have a certain impact on you and how you kind of see your role in the world?
100%. And not only nationally when you're traveling and visiting these countries, but even within those countries, they're so diverse. I mean, exploring Sao Paulo and exploring the Amazon, or exploring the Andes Mountains, or Cusco, and then being in metropolitan cities like Lima, 100%. And it also gave me the opportunity not just to travel throughout the Western Hemisphere, but also through Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. And it's just, there's nothing like being there. I mean, it's difficult now, especially in the days we're living, because of the limitations on travel, but 100% it made all the difference in the world for me.
So how does an organization like IDB help out social entrepreneurs, reduce inequalities in these communities or marginal communities around Latin America. What was the IDB's role, or still is their role, and what did you work on?
Well, what I worked on specifically was creating the youth development program. It was very interesting. I came on board in 1994 to join the IDB. I was asked by then President Enrique Iglesias, not the singer, mind you, but the former Minister of Foreign Relations of Uruguay, who was the president of the IDB at the time, to basically work with the bank to identify the young leaders of the region. In 1994, over 65% of the population in Latin America and the Caribbean was under 30 of age. And of course, youth and young people have been direct beneficiaries of IDB loans and projects through the development process, but they weren't active participants in the design and having a seat at the table. So it was very interesting because, mind you, in 1994, this was before the internet, before the World Wide Web or email. So it was a pretty daunting task. And they also were very clear, at the bank's management and at bank's executive directors, that they didn't want necessarily to identify future IDB bureaucrats or economists, or your perhaps traditional youth leader that has a formal education, but rather leaders from all walks of life, all sectors, whether they were indigenous leaders, tribal leaders, rural leaders, urban leaders. They could have had masters and PhDs, or perhaps they had very little formal education. But the common denominator, the common thing that brought everyone together was how they contributed to their communities. And we hit a gold mine because we received thousands of applications to participate in this process, of which we selected 150 youth from 45 countries to go to Israel. Israel is a donor member country of the IDB. So our Board of Governors meeting, the Board of Governors are the ministers of economy, finance, in the case of the US government, the Secretary of the Treasury, to participate in this process. And they had such an impact, these 150 youth, on the governors, that they asked those youth to select amongst themselves 20 that would be invited and paid for by the IDB to come to our headquarters in Washington, D.C., to create a youth development program. So my life changed there, and the bank changed in the sense that we were very proud then that the IDB Youth Program was created not only for young leaders to participate, but with young leaders to participate in the development process.
What type of value did the young generation bring to the table? Like, what did you not expect that they would be able to bring? And what were some of the results that you saw from that program?
Oh, it's incredible. Ingenuity, grit, their reality. Nobody really knows better than them what their challenges are, whether it's workforce development or employment challenges or education challenges or lifestyle challenges. And one of the things that we learned very quickly was, in order to really draw them in and to hook them, get their attention, we had to speak their language. So thus, young people love music. They love creativity. Thus, we created an incredible partnership with MTV and Viacom. And that partnership, thank goodness to that partnership, which revolutionized the way media and entertainment is working with young people, that led me to my current position at Casey Social Impact Lab that we'll talk about later, with my partner, Mario Catter, Fresh, who was then the head of CSR for Latin America and the Caribbean. And we wanted to change that paradigm about youth because unfortunately, and I'm generalizing, but it's typically true. Unfortunately, young people are in the media for not always good news. I hate that expression, if it bleeds, it leads, but it's true and it exists. But we wanted to change that paradigm and highlight the positive things that the young people were doing. And we did a small, I'll never forget this. It was during the Video Music Awards that MTV produces every year in Latin America. We did like a 30-minute spot, a 30-minute PSA commercial. And the website crashed because we received thousands and thousands of projects, not just ideas, mind you, but existing projects of young leaders. And thus was the creation of Agents of Change, Agentes de Cambio, that the IDB created with MTV, and then brought on other incredible, great partners like Ashoka and their youth venture program, et cetera. So it was a fantastic experience. But that we came to the realization very quickly that in order to really reach young people, you had to speak their language, and draw them in to the process.
So in terms of this cross-sector partnership, the IDB being, is this an NGO? IDB is an NGO?
No, the IDB is an international multilateral organization.
Okay. So now you're working with the private sector, with MTV. Why was it important?
Absolutely.
Right. So why was it important for MTV to, incorporate this type of movement into, their process or their campaign?
Well, it was important for MTV and for Viacom because they want to be agents of change. They want to do good, and it's not good just for their bottom line because they are a media company and it is a business, but they're an incredible vehicle. They're an incredible way to reach millions and millions of households and people, and it's they're corporate citizens. And Mario really made such a strong impact, and when he created this position and then created his team to drive social impact, and the return or the social return on investment was incredible as well. Because MTV was a path, a trailblazer in this area, and what started as agents of change in Latin America became the model for MTV and Viacom's global corporate social responsibility.
Speaking the younger generation's language is something that's so important and is really missed by a lot of big companies now. And leaders, let's just talk about that for instance. You think about Argentina right now, and many other places in Latin America. There's been a civil uprising from a lot of the young generation where they're, from what I've been hearing, they're connecting on social media and they feel like they're not being heard. And they're not being heard by the leaders of these political organizations, by corporations, and they don't want to do anything other than just take this system down. That's what I've been reading in the news. This started before the pandemic, and it's crippled these communities since then. Someone from the UN calling it the epicenter of the pandemic. So with all of this in mind, with the younger generation uprising and coming out and saying, we want change, how does a leader in a political organization, in a corporation, listen to them and speak their language?
Well, I think it's important for a leader in this particular case to embrace them and to listen and to listen. And now the tools have become so powerful that with social media, that they're creating these movements and amplifying their movements and giving these movements strength. And in the Western Hemisphere, there's in most cases, in most countries, they're democracies and they're elected officials and they listen to these youth. And you'd be surprised, but there's a lot of young leaders in positions of power in these countries. And I'm very proud also because when I see a lot of them in certain countries, they actually make it to ministerial level. I worked very closely with the current president of Colombia, President Iván Duque. We worked together for many, many years. And he's a prime example. The youngest president ever elected to Colombia, one of the youngest presidents elected ever in the region. So I think I'm from Argentina, so I'm going to use the tango, but it is a dance, and you have to listen. And thank goodness for these vehicles that give these young people another amplification for their participation, which is so important.
Another thing that I found interesting is all of these uprisings had things in common. Now, also with your impact campaigns and strategies, you weren't just in one location. How important is it to understand these local communities and create the impact you want within those specific communities that have different challenges?
It's everything. You need that local buy-in. I mean, without that, you really can't do anything. You can't parachute down or land down into a particular country, town, tribe, or rural village and think you have all the answers. You're there to listen first. And I think that's super, super important in preparation to our conversation, because it was pretty broad. We're going to talk about social impact, and social impact is what is in the name, front and center of what KC social impact is all about. But it's a term that's thrown around all over the place. And I did a little research and I found that there's over 1.7 billion searches on what social impact is. And there's not a one size fits all definition for it, but But what you need is all these ingredients. Stir them in the pot. But one of the most important ingredients is those local stakeholders and that local buy-in, because they're the ones who are living it in their daily lives.
So maybe break that down for us. How would you define social impact?
How would I define social impact? That's a really good question. I think it's the effect on people and communities that happens as a result of an action or inaction. For instance, it could be an activity, a project, a program, or a policy, and that can be shaped. I mean, decisions can be shaped, behaviors can be changed. I mean, that's the power of storytelling, the power of effective media relations. But it's goes back to, if the tree falls in the middle of the woods and nobody hears it fall, how do you know it falls? I mean, you have to be able to tell that story, and most importantly, after telling that story, incorporate measuring how it worked. How those that program, if you're working on a specific program or project, or working towards changing policy, how are you getting there, and how you're getting there, and measuring all the steps of the way. And most importantly, it's important to see how it worked, and even more importantly, how it didn't work and why it didn't work.
That's something that's so interesting to me, the measurement of impact. Like, how do you do that? Everyone has their own measurement systems. If you go to a conference, they're saying, hey, this is how we measure impact. People aren't sharing how they're measuring impact within their own, like, let's say their portfolio, or they're an impact investor. Like, how do you specifically measure social impact so that you can manage appropriately?
Well, there's not a one size fit all measurement. I wish it was. I wish it could be that easy, but relying on the experts, and relying on data, and how you quantify and qualify that data, and how you analyze that, it's so important. And unfortunately, it's a huge challenge, especially for a lot of the smaller NGOs and nonprofit organizations, that because it's expensive. It could be very expensive because you need a lot of tools and a lot of expertise to really get into the nitty gritty of how you measure these outcomes and you measure these results.
What for our audience listening to this, like, what would be a metric of social impact?
A metric of social impact. Okay, we did a really interesting project with, for instance, when I was at the IDB, and now with KC Social Impact Lab with CONCACAF, with FIFA, using sports as a tool for development. Another really interesting way to draw youth in, and use them as a hook. And we did an employability program called Aganar, which was really fascinating, because the Aganar, which means to win, and avencer, which is to win in Portuguese. The spark for that project was, I'll never forget this, we had a visit by the then Minister of Sport of Brazil, a gentleman by the name of Pele. And Pele came to the bank and threw down the gauntlet and said, we want to use, in this particular case, football, soccer, as the tool for development. And we had to think really hard at the bank, saying, well, how are we going to get public monies and create a program for sports? Because sure, it's great to make better athletes and so forth and so on, and to promote sports, but that's not necessarily the mission of the bank. So we created a workforce development program. And I'm getting back to how you successfully measure the results. And this workforce development program was to teach young people life skills, which is also difficult to measure. But these particular life skills, or habilidades para la vida, or soft skills, as they call them, are super important for employment. And there's a huge, huge issue and challenge with youth unemployment in the world, but especially in Latin America and the Caribbean. So in order for the young people to participate on the pitch, they had to participate in the classrooms off the pitch. And we would incorporate different CEOs and different companies that would come on board as sponsors. And we would meet with these CEOs or these business leaders, and they would tell us, Fabian, we know how to make our widget. We know how to produce our product. But what we don't know necessarily, or have the time to do, is to teach these young people or future employees to communicate, to show up on time, to respect, know how to win, know how to lose, know how to communicate, these life skills, which are so important. And that's the role of this caring adult, which is another factor. But going back to how do you measure this, we first measure how many youth participated in the program, would sign up for the program, how many youth stayed throughout the program, in other words, completed the program, and what grades did they get in the program. And then most importantly, how many youth were hired post-program and during the program, and then how many maintained their employability and their positions. And it would be incredible. I mean, if we had the resources to do a real tracer study to see kind of like, where are they now? That would be fascinating. But this was a program that started in 3 countries, and then it grew and it expanded to over 11 countries.
That's incredible. What would you say would be some of the commonalities between all of these campaigns you've been running? Is it that sense of connection? Is it seeing someone? Is it a mentor? Is it the training? Is it trust? Like, what are some of the things in terms of a leadership perspective that you say would be manifested in all of these projects?
It's I would bring it. The word that I would perhaps use, the best word that I would use, is ganas, which is the will, the want, the want to do this, the desire to do this. And the other words that you bring up are super important: the trust, the mentors. But you have to have the buy-in. You have to have them want to participate in these programs, or else you're not going to get them. You're not going to get their 100% buy-in. You're not going to get their 100% commitments. And a lot of the people that go through these programs fall through the cracks. But it's the desire, and it's also the commitment. For instance, at Casey Social Impact Lab, we've got an incredible partnership with UNICEF, and we're working with UNICEF in this particular case in Honduras. And the commitment of the team and of team building and of the leadership that UNICEF is demonstrating, for instance, in this particular case, is so important, because you need all those elements to come into place, because you have challenges, especially in this particular project, whether it's COVID or natural disasters after the fact, but the commitment never goes away. And if you have that commitment, it's everything. And with those ganas, with that desire.
So you've done a lot of impact initiatives in Latin America. Now with Casey Social Impact Lab, bringing on private or public, sector partnerships, and really trying to grow that impact. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a pandemic hits. And I'll mention it again. Someone's saying the other day, it's the epicenter of this pandemic. People are rising up in the streets because they need to go back to work. It's not looking good over there right now. With all of the efforts that they put in, all the progress that they've made, now we are set back just a little bit. How do you respond to something like that? And what are some of the initiatives maybe that you're working on right now with Casey Social Impact Lab?
It's, you've got to, and everybody's been using this word during the pandemic, but you have to pivot, and you have to change on the fly, and you have to adapt, and you have to change. For instance, a specific initiative, one of our wonderful partners is an organization called One Sight. And One Sight is fighting the vision crisis. I mean, 1 out of 7 people can't see in front of them. And in the case of One Sight, what they do is they've got 2 models which are super important. You have a sustainable model where they actually come into these countries, work with the ministries of health, work with the governments, and train ophthalmologists and optometrists, and affect policy. And then you have the charitable model, where they'll come in. They did a terrific project in the Amazon. Because of the technology that they have, they were able to build eye vision hospitals basically into boats and go into the Amazon River. And this was a really neat project.
Oh,
National Geographic came on board, and Stephanie Sinclair, who's a rock star, Pulitzer Prize photographer,
interesting.
joined this trip. And you actually got to see mothers, see their 7-year-old, 8-year-old kids for the first time, clearly. And it's just something as simple as, and as powerful as combating the vision care crisis. And COVID has really hit it, because they rely a lot on volunteers. They rely a lot on their staff, but you have to be there. You have to be on the ground, and travel restrictions has changed a lot of things. And COVID is affecting, for instance, the work that we're doing with UNICEF in Central America as well. But we'll get there, and we'll get it done. It's just you have to adapt and be creative. And I think that's a lot of the positive things. If there is a silver lining to COVID, is adapting and changing and coming up with these really interesting solutions that perhaps were never in one's mind before this happened. Trying to basically be able to be there, whether it's virtually like you and I are together this afternoon, or optimally in person and on the ground, because nothing replaces that.
Fabian, I don't know about you, but I've had a lot of time to think by myself during this pandemic. Staying at home, plenty of time to sit and reflect. Have you ever thought about like what's keeping you going, and maybe a lifetime goal of your own?
What keeps me going is the work that we do, the lives that we change. Being able to come up with an aha moment, with a client, with a partner, and seeing the good that comes out of this, and trying to be as resourceful and trying to be an agent of change as one can be, not being there on the ground or in person, fighting that fight with your partners and your clients. But it's the mission of the organizations that we support, whether it's a company or an international organization or an non-governmental organization. it's coming up with or playing a role in coming up with those solutions to these big social, global issues that are affecting so many people.
Fabian, what's your philosophy on like capitalism and how it should be used to approach these problems? Like, for instance, Milton Friedman, it's maximize shareholder value. That's the social responsibility of a business. And a business isn't a person. And those business leaders need to make decisions to maximize that profitability. So that's what Milton Friedman said in 1980. Now, what's your philosophy on this? Do you think capitalism can optimize for something more than just the bottom line?
100%. Capitalism is so important, and there's so many, I wouldn't call them spin-offs, but so many, programs and initiatives, whether it's conscious capitalism created by the founder of Whole Foods, and I know you had Matthew Weatherly White on, from CapRock, and how he's worked with impact investment, and you guys yourselves, real leaders, being a B Corp. I mean, it's a for-profit corporation that wants to do good. And if you look, and I know we've had this discussion in one of our earlier talks about business schools and how young people are changing, and how these business schools have to change and to adapt to capture these young future business leaders. I mean, one of a really interesting study that came out from the World Economic Forum in 2017, they interviewed over 25,000 young people between the ages of 18 and 35 from 186 countries. And they took part in this Global Shapers annual survey. Though the World Economic Forum has this wonderful partnership called the Global Shapers, which is this network of these incredible young leaders that are in hubs all over the world. And it found that over 40% of these young people think that a sense of purpose or impact on society is one of the most important criteria when considering a career opportunity in the for-profit business world. And then if you look at organizations, that are working on socially responsible investing or impact investing, I mean, it's doing good for the company, for the bottom line, for the profitable return on investment, but also creating an SROI, a social return on investment, which is super important. And there's organizations like the Global Impact Investing Network, the GIN, that's supported by USAID and the Rockefeller Foundation, and banks like JP Morgan and the MacArthur Foundation. There are these incredible resources. Capitalism is what drives the economies. And look at, for instance, when they created, in 2010, 10 years ago, the Giving Pledge, when Warren Buffett got together with Bill Gates, and that started with 40 pledges from 40 people, just in the United States. And in 10 years now, it's over 200 pledges in over 24 countries. I mean, and it's, and a lot of these people who are making these pledges are, billionaires, and, they're in the billionaires club and capitalists. And that wouldn't exist without, the positive side of capitalism.
Now, what do you think about that though, as well? Like the Giving Pledge, like when you donate a percentage of your profits to something else, whether it's a foundation, a contribution. Do you think that's enough to sustain the problems that we're facing in today's day and age? I mean, for instance, we got 4 billion people in poverty. We've got climate change, rising sea levels, acidic oceans, some systemic problems as well. I mean, do you think philanthropic capital is enough to sustain these things? And I guess maybe the better question is do you think those corporations, these for-profits, are, like you said, speaking the younger generation's language?
It's never enough.
It's never enough. That's right.
It's never enough. I mean, the world's we're going through some major challenges, and there's a lot of people suffering, and every day there's more people suffering, but it's a step in the right direction, and everybody's got to come together. I mean, It's important that these steps are being taken place. It's not just about these people, this network of over 200 billionaires who have committed, big part of their fortunes to philanthropy, but that's great. But it's also really important how they're getting together. They meet once a year in their particular case, and they discuss ideas, and they discuss the best ways to invest or the best ways to collaborate. You got to bring all the players in, and then that's complicated too, because different sectors have different speeds, and I learned that the hard way. But you have to work with everybody, and that was my formal training in the fire. Learning by doing, because that's basically what I did. One of the first things that we did that I'm very proud of when I was at the IDB in my career was we created the Inter-American Working Group on Youth Development, which was an interagency working group to collaborate, not just to share financial resources, but to share brain trust and to share, what's working and, more importantly, what's not working. And then throughout that process, we brought in bilateral agencies and large foundations and young people themselves, which was super important. But that collaboration is a must. And now with the tools that we have and with technology, it's that much easier.
It's interesting how this next generation is communicating as well. Like, I think I mentioned earlier about people gathering and rallying and protesting and organizing through social media, yet they're leaderless movements. There's no there's no MLK, there's no Malcolm X, there's no Harriet Truman, there's no person that you can identify that's leading that movement. And then when that happens, there seems to be a sense of a loss of connection, a loss of trust, maybe a miscommunication. How do you see like social media's role in the ever-changing landscape of communications changing, and how do you see that impacting communication in order to achieve a common goal?
Oh, it's social media is everything, and it's, for me personally, being somebody in my early 50s, it's a big challenge. I guess I have a big advantage that I have 4 kids, and my youngest is 16, who's kind of my mentor and trainer in social media. Because once you think you get the gist of Facebook is no longer perhaps the tool for young people. And then Twitter obviously has different power. And then, no, Twitter, Facebook, no, we're on Instagram. And no, Instagram's not cool. No, it's the TikTok. Or no, it's not. It's incredible how fast, and for them, I'm not a technology native. I'm a technology immigrant. I wasn't born with it. They're born with this. I mean, they have it built into their DNA. And these movements are just incredibly, but as effective as it is, it's also a double-edged sword, because you lose a lot of that accountability, and I call them, and not all of them, because there's some incredible movements that have stayed, but there's also a lot of movements that perhaps are the flavor of the week or the flavor of the day, and sustainability is important, and it is a challenge.
Well, what's different though? I mean, you mentioned, we did this movement before the internet was even there. Like, what's different about rallying, a community together to achieve a common goal back in I think you said 1984 versus in 2020, when everyone's online communicating and reading the surface level stuff and trying to organize that way?
There's a lot of differences. I mean, and I think I mentioned it earlier, nothing replaces the face-to-face. Right. Now you can be face-to-face, you can be screen-to-screen now. And now how many people have, it's incredible. We do a lot of this research on how many people have access, even in the developing world, of smartphones, of internet access, of, I was in a meeting with the Ministry of Education of Argentina not that long ago, and a lot of these kids and a lot of these teachers, they're getting their curriculum and they're learning via WhatsApp. I mean, the use of WhatsApp, for instance, is something incredible. And, that's because of the COVID situation. That's, the next best thing to, listening to your teacher and seeing your teacher. And in this particular case, they're listening to their teacher or getting the recordings or communicating with their teachers via WhatsApp. And I had my doubts, because I'm thinking, well, how do they get to the poorest of the poor, or to the, to the base of the pyramid, but there is the internet penetration and smartphone access is pretty incredible, but it's not the end all cure, obviously.
Yeah. How do you see that? Like, when you think about the leapfrog approach, these, this younger generation in Latin America, leapfrogging the desktop or tablets or TVs and going straight to the mobile phone. Like, how do you see that changing the infrastructure and the economy and communication in Latin America, versus 10 years ago?
Oh, it's a world of difference. Yeah. And the fact that these smartphones and WhatsApp is so much more economical than having a laptop, or, like, as you mentioned, a television. Nobody under 25, I'm generalizing, of course, but I don't think anyone under 25 even watches television, and here or in Latin America or the Western Hemisphere. It's all YouTube or online entertainment or online ways of communicating. And before, when I supported a lot of these youth, I remember I did a lot of work bridging the digital divide. in the late 90s or early 2000, and working with, bringing in companies like Microsoft and bringing in NGOs and organizations like the Committee for the Democratization of Informatics, and how challenging it was, because then a youth, in order to have access to a computer or, learn how to program, and then afterwards, when the internet came, be able to participate, they went to these famous, and they were very, a lot of these projects were developed by a lot of organizations, these internet cafe movements, or these internet stations, and now it's boiled down to something as small as this, and which it becomes their office, their entertainment, and their way of doing business.
So now let's look forward ourselves. Like, where do you see this impact movement going? In a couple of years, what would you like to see, and how would you like to see society and capitalism evolve?
Well, I think capitalism is a key. I think you need the private sector. You need to leverage your resources. You need to bring in a lot of different players and stakeholders to the table. I think technology is just changing every second. I mean, we're very fortunate at KC. We have on our team Julia D'Amico, who Mario and I both worked with when I was at the IDB, and Mario was at MTV. Julia was with the Italian government at the time, and then she was also the CEO of One Laptop Per Child, and also had management positions at Lego Education. And you need to have those type of people, and to help you push that vision, and that it's incredible how ed tech and both are so important. Education and technology is changing the world. We're in early conversations with a leading AI firm, working on artificial intelligence, but they want to do it for good. I mean, it's just you've got to be abreast of everything. Even you've got to read up on everything, but it changes by the second. I mean, it's so important. But like I said, when Facebook comes out, then it's the Instagram, and then it's the TikTok, and then it's the Twitter, and you look at it from, we were talking about government and youth participation and the democratic process. I mean, these tools are vital for that, and getting those messages across.
Fabian, we talked a lot about the younger generation. What advice do you have for the more sophisticated and experienced generation?
I guess what advice would I tell myself? I guess, because you're most certainly a young leader and a youth, is don't forget not only where you came from, but when you were that age. It's hard sometimes for people to look back, but the advice that I give is to don't forget when you were a young person. I've often been misintroduced as a youth development specialist, for interest, or somebody who's worked for his whole career in youth development specialist. And I would always tell people that doesn't really exist, because there are youth employment specialists, there are youth and technology specialists, youth and culture specialists, but youth is it's not a sector. It's really a stage in one's life that we all go through. So don't forget, give you a little bit of that Peter Pan. Don't you can grow up and be a person, but put yourself in those shoes, and their shoes, or in the shoes of young people. And you can do that because, I can't speak for everybody, but I think in most cases we were people that get older are younger. And another important element, I think, that can't be overthought is the intergenerational dialogue, which is so important, and talk to, the older people, and, have those stories. And that goes into how powerful storytelling is, and from that historical perspective as well.
Well, one of those words in terms of dialogue was ganas, that you used earlier in the show, the want. How would you describe, and what is your definition, Fabian, of a real leader?
My definition of a real leader is, and I think about this all the time, because there are so many definitions, but, and this is something that someone once told me that means a lot to me. He said, Fabian, a real leader is somebody who sends the elevator back down. You're going up, you're building your career, you're building your knowledge, you're building your base. But then, send that elevator back down to the next generation of younger leaders. I mean, we're doing that in our daily practice at KC Social Impact Lab. We're all young at heart, but we have these two incredible young leaders who are recent graduates of the Harvard Divinity School, and we created this they created, and they're leading this new initiative called the Deeper Dive, which I invite everybody to check out on the deeperdive.org, which is in this particular case taking religious literacy and how it affects media and entertainment. It's so diverse, but it's everywhere. But it's incredible, and I'm blown away every time I meet with these young leaders who are taking this on and creating this and developing these new things. So it's not just important to in our particular case to listen to the young leaders, but also bring them on board.
I love it. It's much needed, definitely in today's day and age. Now, Fabian, let's get some shout outs here. Where can people find more information about the KC Social Impact Lab, and what are some websites that they should be going
They can go to our website, which is kcsocialimpactlab.com. Again, it's kcsocialimpactlab.com, and they can go into or deeperdive.org, which is this program that we created, and we've got some great case studies there, and it talks about everything that we do, and we're excited. I mean, there are challenging times, but we've got some incredible partners, some incredible clients that I call partners, that are just doing incredible work, and if we can just help them, leverage resources and help them get their story out, and to amplify their message, it's just incredible. But the good things that are happening.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm glad we were able to amplify your message today, Fabian. Thanks for coming on the show. I had a great time speaking with you. I learned a lot about your background, your history, especially in Latin America, the importance of youth involvement and inclusion, and how you measure impact. So I thought it was a great conversation for Fabian Koss. I'm Kevin Edwards, asking you to go out there, send the elevator back down, folks, and always keep it real. Thanks, Fabian.
Thank you.
All right, good people. Well, thanks for hanging on to this episode on Crowdcast. Again, you can find that episode on the Real Leaders podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, any place you listen to podcasts. We're on there. Fabian's going to stick around for some questions at the end of this show right now. So if you have any questions for him, please just say something in the chat box to the right, and I will ask him your question. Whoever is up first, I'll make sure I ask them that first. Also, folks, while we're waiting for those questions, again, I will mention the Real Leaders digital magazine is available for $1 a year right now, folks. $1 a year. Go online to realleaders.com. Cyber Monday going on today, and pick up your digital subscription for $1, folks. That's $1 for all 12 months. I don't know why we're doing it, Fabian. It's not a really good offer for us, at least. Great for the customers. Looks like we got one question flying in. First one is this, Fabian. He asked, let's see, what kind of impact did Maradona have on you as an Argentinian? And are there any leadership lessons you learned from watching him play?
Wow. Rest in peace, Diego. That's the first thing I'll have to say. He was probably, if not the most important export for Argentina, as far as putting Argentina on the map in the modern world. Watching him play was something so special, because what he was able to do on the field was, life changing, in the sense that no one else could replicate that. Off the field, unfortunately, he suffered a lot and lived a very complex life. He came from very, very humble backgrounds and was thrown into the soccer world he was discovered at a very, very early age, and it took him around the world, and he did things on the pitch that were just unbelievable. And it's just evident when you see the pain that the Argentine, not just the Argentines, but the world is going through. The covers of every major newspaper around the world, the power of sport, the power of those dreams, someone who came from economically nothing and got to the highest levels of his sport. And it's just a lot of lessons that can be learned, and his life, unfortunately, was cut way too short.
And Fabian, while we're waiting for some more questions, audience is a little shy today. You mentioned that you used Pele as an example as well, to incorporate them. How important is sports and the media coverage for sports and developing, a youth attitude, youth skills and soft skills and things like that you can't really find outside of sports?
Sports are so important. Sports, because many of these athletes are heroes to so many young people, and not just young people, but we're talking about youth and children in this context. So they listen, they garner their attention, and then when they put their money where their mouth is, not just their money, but their time and their commitment and to becoming agents of change. And those are that's a neat program that we did with MTV as well, was with athletes, not just musicians, but using, and it's not just about for the photo op. It's really choosing these incredible athletes. There's organizations like Laureate Sports for Good, and CONCACAF that we work very closely with at Casey Social Impact Lab. That they're, from their top management, from the top all the way down, they believe in corporate social responsibility and using the power of sport as a channel and as a vehicle to do social good. And you learn so much. And it, whether it's, we go back to that caring adult, which is so important, because unfortunately, a lot of kids don't see their parents, or aren't raised by their parents, or they're not in school, or they don't go to religious services. So it's not a parent or a boss or a mentor, and that caring adult in their lives in many cases is replaced by that coach, that plays a double role as coaching them to become better at the game that they're learning, but also coaching them to become better human beings.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that before the show in our meeting, and I was listening to a lecture. It was about like The Lion King, based on like Carl Jung's philosophy of development, and Simba, losing his father at a young age, going, and then he had the Hakuna Matata mentality, no worries, right? And then comes back and, really had to look into himself and ask, Father, where are you? And that's how a lot of people are left in this world, without a father, without a mentor, and they need that assistance, that mentorship to learn those life skills. Any other examples of how you've been able to incorporate that in a partnership or in a youth development program?
No, absolutely. With the CDI model that we did with, at that time, Star Media and the Committee for the Democratization of Informatics in Microsoft, we brought in all these different partners, and not just to provide the software and to provide the computers and the internet access, but then also that mentoring, working with those community leaders. I'll never forget going into the shanty towns, which are called favelas in Rio, and seeing, unsavory characters, many with machine guns or so forth and so on, but bringing in their kids, and for them, seeing their eyes open when they see their child for the first time work with a mentor who shows them a keyboard or a screen for the first time. And then again, it goes to that local buy-in, which is so important, training the trainers, working with those community leaders that are going to stay there, that are going to be there, that are part of the fabric of that community, working with these people that are coming, with an agenda of development, an agenda of improving their skills, so they can later on, get different opportunities, whether through employment or education. A lot of the things that we found, and going back to that Aganar workforce development program, was something we weren't even looking for, but it's something that we measured. Was, it was preparing these young kids who left school, that were of legal age to get a job, preparing them for workforce development, but they got so much confidence in doing these programs that they went back to school and finished their middle school, and then got their high school degrees, diplomas, or equivalents.
Incredible work, Fabian. Talk about impact too, man. I'm glad we had you on the show, and you definitely exemplify what a real leader is. So thank you for coming on the show today.
No, thank you for having me.
Just want to appreciate and thank you, all good people, for hanging on to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast with Fabian Koss. We hope you enjoyed it, folks, as much as we did. And if you want to make sure that you're notified of this podcast release on Wednesday, make sure you subscribe to the Real Leaders Podcast. There's a link right in there. Go to realleaders.com/podcast. Subscribe to any platform: Spotify, Apple Music, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, anywhere that you listen to a podcast. We're on there. Make sure you subscribe and hear Fabian's episode coming out this Wednesday. Fabian, been a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks for coming on, and stay tuned, folks, for the next episode.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.